Let's get to Canada and its threat to cut off energy exports to the U.S. in retaliation for the Trump tariffs.
As you know, there's a very strong man in Canada who said he was going to charge a surcharge or a tariff on electricity.
We roll over as a country and just let them run over us, or we fight like hell, like we've never fought before.
For nearly 2 centuries, the United States and Canada stood side by side, not just as neighbours, but as deeply intertwined partners in trade, defence and energy. Their economies merged at the seams. Ontario's factories fed Detroit's auto lines. Quebec's hydropower lit homes in New York. Canada's troops even deployed beside American forces on foreign soil. But in 2025, all of that began to change, not with loud declarations or public outrage, but through a series of quiet, calculated moves. It started with tariffs. Then came energy surcharges. Now, entire factories and supply chains are being rerouted across the Atlantic. And at the heart of this economic breakup is Ontario, Canada's most industrial and populous province. Ontario is no longer just reacting, it's leading. Its leaders, investors and manufacturers are openly pursuing partnerships with Europe while systematically reducing their reliance on the United States. Real quick, if you're into videos that cut through the noise and break things down clearly, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps more people find this, and if you're not subscribed yet, now's a good time. We've got more deep dives coming your way. Also, drop a comment and let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your take. Now onto the video. The turning point wasn't just one event. It was a build-up of grievances, rising protectionism under the Trump administration, broken trade deals, and what many Canadian officials called economic bullying. The final straw came in early 2025, when the US government announced a drastic escalation, doubling tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminium, 2 commodities that anchor Ontario's economy. The response? Strategic, targeted, and deeply symbolic. Ontario didn't resort to shouting matches or retaliatory speeches. It responded with policy, namely a bold energy export surcharge and a historic $20 billion deal with Volkswagen that will divert clean tech exports away from the United States entirely. This isn't just a trade story, it's a tectonic shift. Ontario, once known for its quiet role as America's top supplier, is reshaping its identity. No longer just the friendly neighbour, it's becoming a standalone force in clean energy, manufacturing and geopolitics. Europe is stepping in where America once dominated. Investment is flowing across the Atlantic, and a new continental power structure is beginning to emerge. For the United States, the implications are sobering. If other provinces follow Ontario's lead, British Columbia with its energy exports, or Quebec with its European-facing ports, the entire North American trade framework could unravel. America's grip on regional dominance is weakening, and the replacement isn't China or Russia, it's Europe, through its growing influence on Canadian soil. So how did we get here? What set this economic earthquake in motion? And can the United States reverse it, or is the rift now permanent? Let's start where the damage began, with tariffs that were supposed to protect America, but may have cost it its closest ally. In the opening months of 2025, President Donald Trump's administration reignited a firestorm that had been simmering for years. After months of stalled trade talks, escalating rhetoric, and rising protectionist pressure from domestic steel producers, the White House made a bombshell announcement. Effective immediately, the United States would impose a 50% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminium. The decision stunned policymakers in Ottawa and Queen's Park. It wasn't just the size of the tariff, it was the message it sent. Canada, America's closest trade partner and one of its few remaining geopolitical allies, had been lumped into the same category as strategic adversaries. The tariff, ostensibly justified on national security grounds, was seen in Canada as both a betrayal and a humiliation. Nowhere was the impact more immediate or more painful than in Ontario. As Canada's manufacturing engine, Ontario depends heavily on US markets. The province's steel mills in Hamilton and Sault Ste. Marie, aluminium producers in the north, and hundreds of parts suppliers across southern Ontario all ship daily to American automakers, construction firms, and defence contractors. Overnight, those shipments became 50% more expensive and 50% less competitive. The fallout spread quickly. Ontario's auto sector, already under pressure from global EV shifts, saw major US orders paused or cancelled. Factory managers warned of potential layoffs. Unions demanded answers, and within days, Premier Doug Ford was on national television with a fiery address. "You come at us. We aren't rolling over," Ford declared, echoing a sentiment that resonated far beyond provincial borders. He didn't mince words. Ontario would retaliate, not with anger, but with strategy. The US had taken a hammer to the trading relationship, and Ontario would now play hardball with the very lifeblood of US border economies, electricity and clean energy. But Ford wasn't acting in isolation. The move was part of a broader rethinking of Ontario's economic future. For years, provincial officials had quietly raised concerns about the volatility of US politics and the unreliability of long-term American policy commitments. Trump's tariff escalation confirmed their worst fears. Instead of begging Washington for relief or waiting for tariffs to be lifted, Ontario chose to act. It began engaging with European partners, particularly Germany and France, who were hungry for access to Canadian critical minerals, clean energy, and manufacturing space. And perhaps most importantly, Ontario policymakers began to seriously consider what an economic model would look like without US dependency. The shockwaves extended to Washington, where even Trump allies expressed concerns. Senator Josh Hawley called the tariffs a blunt tool that could backfire, and automakers in Michigan and Ohio urged for exemptions for Canadian imports. But the administration stood firm. The tariffs were here to stay, at least through the 2025 re-election cycle. What Washington didn't expect, however, was that Canada, usually known for playing the long game, was about to retaliate far more effectively than anyone imagined. And instead of steel or aluminum, Ontario's next move would target something far more vital: energy. While headlines focused on steel and aluminum, Ontario's government was preparing to wield a far more potent form of economic leverage: electricity. What most Americans don't realise is that Ontario is more than just a manufacturing powerhouse. It's also a critical energy supplier to the United States, particularly to the densely populated border states of Michigan and New York. For decades, Ontario's nuclear power plants and hydroelectric dams have generated an abundance of clean, affordable electricity. Thanks to long-standing cross-border agreements, this surplus power flowed southward, quietly powering US homes, hospitals, and factories. In fact, nearly 30% of electricity imported into Michigan and New York is sourced directly from Ontario. It was a relationship built on trust, efficiency, and shared prosperity. But in the wake of the 50% US tariff hike on Canadian metals, Ontario decided it was time to test just how dependent America had become. Premier Doug Ford's administration announced a 25% surcharge on electricity exports, a move that sent shockwaves through US utility companies. The surcharge wasn't framed as a punishment, but rather as a proportional response. If the US could double tariffs on Canadian goods, Ontario could raise the price on the lifeblood flowing into American cities. The reaction was immediate. Michigan's utilities scrambled to assess the impact on their grids. New York's energy operators issued contingency plans and began testing dormant backup systems. While the surcharge did not cause an immediate blackout, it came close. Energy costs surged in affected areas, placing pressure on both consumers and businesses already grappling with inflation and rising interest rates. More importantly, the surcharge exposed a dangerous vulnerability in America's infrastructure, one that had long been ignored. The US likes to present itself as energy independent, but this move revealed otherwise. Ontario's strategic use of energy as an economic tool demonstrated that cross-border power flows were no longer just technical agreements. They had become geopolitical chess pieces. Ford's government was unflinching. "This isn't about revenge," said Ontario's Minister of Energy. "It's about fairness. We're showing that Canada is not a doormat. If Washington wants to play hardball, we can too." The move was historic. Never before had a Canadian province leveraged electricity exports as a political weapon. And while the surcharge was significant, it was only a warning shot. Analysts noted that if Ontario were to cut off exports entirely, blackouts could occur in under 48 hours in some American cities. Hospitals could be left in the dark, factories could halt production, and households would suffer without a single missile being fired or tank crossing a border. The implications were chilling. Ontario had demonstrated that it held the high ground, literally and figuratively, when it came to North America's power grid. And in doing so, it reshaped how policymakers in Washington viewed their northern neighbour. Canada was no longer just a friendly, frozen supplier. It was a strategic force, capable of influencing American domestic affairs not through lobbying or lawsuits, but through energy itself. For decades, this vulnerability had been hidden behind assumptions of goodwill. Now it was front and centre, and it would serve as the foundation for Ontario's next move, leaving the US behind and turning to Europe. While tensions were escalating over electricity and tariffs, Ontario was quietly building something far more enduring than a surcharge, a new future in partnership with Europe. In a landmark deal that stunned both the Canadian and American business communities, Ontario finalised a $20 billion agreement with German auto giant Volkswagen. The centrepiece of this deal? The construction of one of the largest battery manufacturing plants in North America, located in St. Thomas, Ontario. This wasn't just another industrial investment. It was a strategic realignment. The new gigafactory would produce lithium-ion cells for more than 1 million electric vehicles annually, making it a cornerstone of Europe's long-term green energy goals. And unlike previous auto deals, not a single battery produced at this facility would be shipped to the United States. Instead, every unit would be exported across the Atlantic, directly to European markets. The decision to exclude the US was not coincidental. It was a deliberate move to bypass a volatile, tariff-prone trade partner in favour of a more stable and aligned economic ally. We want to partner with those who share our climate values, our economic vision, and our long-term commitments, said an Ontario official during the press announcement. Right now, that's Europe. To support this shift, Ontario undertook massive infrastructure upgrades. Roads were repaved, railways were expanded, shipping lines were realigned to European Union standards, and specialised training programs were launched to ensure that workers could meet strict EU specifications. Every part of the operation, from supply to assembly, was designed to comply not with American norms, but with European ones. Northern Ontario's mines ramped up production of nickel, cobalt, and lithium, with contracts inked directly with European buyers. Instead of shipping those materials to US battery plants, they would now be processed locally in Canada and then exported to ports in Rotterdam and Hamburg. Quebec's shipping hubs were modernised to handle this transatlantic traffic, and new storage terminals were built along the St. Lawrence River. Even Ontario's clean energy supply was enlisted to support the new venture. Hydroelectric power and nuclear plants were tapped to power the entire gigafactory, aligning perfectly with Europe's green energy requirements. The St. Thomas plant became more than a factory. It became a symbol of economic sovereignty. Ontario was declaring that it would no longer allow its economic future to be dictated by policy swings in Washington. Instead, it would align itself with regions that offered predictability, partnership, and progress. The deal also attracted further European investment. Within weeks, other clean tech companies from the Netherlands, France, and Norway began exploring partnerships in Ontario. The province positioned itself not as America's factory floor, but as Europe's North American launchpad. And for US automakers and suppliers, the message was sobering. Ontario had been a cornerstone of the North American auto supply chain for decades. Now, it was shifting allegiance, and the United States was no longer part of the equation. This pivot raised fundamental questions. If Ontario could build a self-sustaining trade and energy alliance with Europe, what would stop other provinces from doing the same? Would British Columbia reroute its clean hydrogen exports to Asia? Would Quebec deepen its ties with France? The dominoes were beginning to fall. But Ontario wasn't done. Having redrawn its industrial roadmap, the province set its sights on something even more strategic: Canada's role in global defence and diplomacy. It wasn't just Ontario's economy that was realigning. By the spring of 2025, the Canadian federal government was making diplomatic and military moves that cemented its growing distance from Washington. In a dramatic and symbolic shift, newly elected Prime Minister Mark Carney chose Paris, not Washington, as the destination for his first official state visit. Standing side by side with French President Emmanuel Macron, Carney announced a comprehensive strategic partnership between Canada and the European Union. This wasn't just about trade. It encompassed energy cooperation, clean tech development, digital infrastructure, and, crucially, defence collaboration. The message was loud and clear. Canada was no longer content being America's junior partner. Instead, it would cultivate diverse alliances, especially with regions that valued stability, multilateralism, and long-term vision. What we're witnessing isn't a dramatic break or a sudden collapse. It's something more strategic, more permanent. Canada, led by Ontario, is redrawing the map of North America, not with borders or armies, but with energy flows, supply chains, trade deals, and investment pipelines. The decisions made in 2025 may define the next 25 years. And while the US still holds economic power, its grip on the continent is loosening, not because of an external threat, but because it failed to value the partnership it once had. Ontario's actions, charging a surge fee on electricity, building Europe-bound factories, rejecting US defence contracts, weren't random outbursts. They were part of a broader strategy. A signal that Canada is no longer waiting to be treated fairly, it's taking control of its own future. And Europe is answering that call. With billions in investment, tech transfers, and clean energy partnerships, the European Union is quietly stepping into a role the US used to occupy. The big question now isn't just what will the US do, it's can it adapt? Can it rethink its approach to allies before more of them walk away? A decade from now, historians may look back at this moment not as a rupture, but as a redirection. And they'll remember that Canada didn't break away from the US. The US pushed Canada to walk away. Once again, thanks for watching this video. If you got something out of this, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. And hey, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Agree, disagree, or something in between? I'd love to hear it.